Welcome to Legendary Exits, conversations with purpose-driven entrepreneurs. In this series, we sit down with the leaders and legends who turned their exits into opportunities for impact. We explore living lives of significance, leveraging exits to fund personal and financial goals, and building a best-in-class business along the way. You ready? Let's dive in.
Eric, it is great to be with you. I'm here today with my friend, Dr. Eric Roman, who has exited from his own business, and to hear from his story and learn from him today. But Eric, so great to be with you. Thanks for carving out some time to talk today.
Micah, what a joy. I'm grateful to be a guest here with you. And, you know, I love that we get to talk about something that you and I have talked about for years.
Yes.
And so I'm excited to see where the convo goes.
Yeah. Well, before we get into the details of your own exit and your own story and sharing some lessons out of that, help everybody who's listening just get a little bit acquainted with you. You know, who are you? Tell us about yourself or your family or where you're living at. Maybe let's start there.
Yeah, that sounds like an existential question. Who am I? You know,
You can take it as wide or as narrow as you want.
I'm Eric. I'm a father of 5 kids. As part of our post-exit journey, my wife and I, we moved our family. We wanted a new life post-exit. We moved from the East Coast after building a number of businesses in the Carolinas. Growing up in Florida, we moved out west. We're in the mountains of Utah now, enjoying a different existence. There's a lot of intention to that and a lot that we've learned. And so, you know, if we end up there, we do. I'm a guy that lives a life with a lot of joy, and I have a lot of energy that I get to share with others, and that's what I've recognized that my businesses have really been built around. It's been built around my ability to share my energy with other people in a manner that provides value for them in their lives. That's like the basis of it. When you take a step further back, I'm actually I was licensed as a dentist, even though I haven't done dentistry in about a decade almost, it seems like, maybe 8 years. And that was my first business model, was building multi-location dental franchises. Since then, I've been a coach, an entrepreneur, an investor. I've built more than a half dozen businesses since a big exit in 19. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of an essence of my journey.
I do. It does. And I do concur with you that you bring the energy. And in the, I don't know, 5 years I've known you now, that's a hallmark that you bring.
You know, I can't not do it. So, you know, there it is.
Take us back. I think sometimes when you hear about an exit or you hear about somebody who's exited, you assume, man, they must have come from a family of entrepreneurs or they must have come from business. What was that like going way back? What kind of a family did you grow up in? Did you have siblings? Was entrepreneurship a theme of that? How did you go? Yeah. What were the origins there?
Zero.
Okay.
I'm an outlier. My family worked for the man. My father was an airline pilot. My mom was a flight attendant. My grandfather was an airline pilot. My grandmother was a flight attendant. And if you know anything about the airline industry, it is a seniority-based industry.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter if you're the best pilot or the worst. What matters is how long you've been with a certain company. And I had parents that were both in Eastern Airlines, which eventually went bankrupt. And it was at a very difficult or like instrumental time in my life. 8 years old, like you're very malleable then. And I took on a lot of traumas from that personally because my parents lost their jobs. They were on picket lines. Like they were looking for, like we were going through all these things. And what was hard for me was to understand that my parents had nothing to do with this. This was decreed to them and had no bearing on their skills, their knowledge, their capacity. And yet it was screwing up my life, you know? And so those were some really hard times, Micah, you know, I mean, having both your parents lose their job at the same time. My mom never went back to working. My dad went back, well, not in the airline industry. My dad did, and he went through a bunch of horrific other cycles. It went with another airline, then that airline gets purchased, and he loses seniority again. And then as he gets to the end of his career, he's got no additional time left before the federal government forces him to retire, right? Because it's a forced retirement for pilots. And right before his forced retirement, 9/11 happens. The airlines all go bankrupt. My dad actually loses about 60% of his retirement inside of that entire thing. And man. And so what's the thing that I take away from that?
Yes.
I want to be the master of my work life. I don't want to be in a scenario where someone else has control over what happens to me and to my family. And so I became a first generation entrepreneur.
I love that. And when you were talking about that, the word control came to mind. I know you brought it out there.
I'm a control freak. My wife told me.
Well, you speak about it obviously with such clarity now. We always talk that hindsight is 2020. But you talked about some catalyzing events starting when you were 8 years old.
Yeah.
How did that play out? Because it's easy to look back at it now and to see it with total clarity that apparently that event catalyzed you to become an entrepreneur. But was that really sort of the way that it worked out? I mean, I know you had a early career in playing college sports. So obviously you're a high performance person, but was that something that really impacted you in that sort of a way, or just sort of the way that you tell the story now? Does that make sense?
I mean, it's a really, really great question. I don't know that I can answer it. What I can say is that, number one, I was really hungry for success. I was hungry for a greater success than what I felt like we experienced as a family. There was a hunger there.
Yeah.
The second thing was there was like a measure of capacity. Like I felt like I felt the confidence of knowing I could do what I needed to do to achieve. I had a great athletic career. Like I could have continued playing professional athletic. Like I could have. Those were choices I don't question. Like nobody ever told me, son, you can't do this. It was that, I know I could keep playing if I wanted to. It's, but where's my heart right now, right? And so there was a measure of like internal belief in my capacity, not being limited by external circumstances was kind of how I felt. And so I think those things all probably played together. Like that maybe this is the pot and the recipe, like the little ingredients that were in the pot to give me a basis of where I could go.
Yeah, wanted control and hungry for success. And I know you were a pitcher in Florida, right? In
Florida State,
undergrad. Yeah, Florida State. So obviously you went to dentistry school after undergrad.
Yep.
Did you go immediately into work for someone else? Did you immediately become a business owner? Were you working for the man initially and then sort of made the transition out? What was that just early career segment like for you?
Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that I knew my career wasn't gonna before I was done with dental school. It was pretty apparent my career wasn't going to look like your stereotypical model of a dentist. I was spending the majority of my time like learning dental business models and about the business industry of dentistry, and not worried about the last 12 questions to get right on the test. And
where did that come from? Why?
That was what was inside of me, Micah. Like that was, at several different points in my life, I've won the most likely to succeed award. And
Sure.
I think it's just like there's something behaviorally. I never even asked for any of that, but that was what was interesting, Micah. I was attracted to learning about business. I was attracted to learning about marketing and accounting and all these other things, and think about how then does this apply to what I'm doing, and what do I want my future to look like? You know what I recognized? I recognized something that nobody wants to admit, but it's the truth. Your success as a dentist has nothing to do with your clinical capacity. Nobody knows if their dentist typically is really that good or that bad. But the success of the dentist practice has to do with their ability to operate a true business, right? And yet dentists have none of those skills. And so I recognized that early on, that like that the difference, like when you're a dentist and you're dealing in like micrometers, like something so many, like fractions of a millimeter is
Yeah.
like what we're dealing with. That has nothing to do with the success of the business. The success of my business was going to have to do with what
Yeah.
my customers thought of it, of the
Sure.
value creation for them, of how easy it was for them to be there and how successfully they felt like their needs were met, right? Like
Yes.
that's the success of the business.
Were you talking
So,
about, if I could jump in, you're talking about the difference of the perspective. So frequently in business, we say, oh, this is a technical person and this is a
yep,
person who leads a business. And the
yep.
technical person loves, working on the teeth or the scientific aspect of it. But the person who loves working on the business really deeply cares about the customers. Not that they
Yes.
both don't, right? But I guess my question
In a
is,
different way, in a weird, in an oddly
yeah,
different way.
yeah, not to diminish either one, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, in a really different way. I guess my question is, how did that, clearly you had this hunger for that you talked about, even started in dental school,
Yeah.
and you had a predisposition, but how did that get catalyzed? I assume you went to dental school because you were interested in working on teeth. Maybe I'm wrong, but was there a talk? Was there a mentor? Was there a book you read? How did that change from the technician to the business leader sort of occur in dental school?
Yeah, it's an interesting question too. Why did I even go? Why did I even go there? I'll acknowledge that first and foremost, Micah, there's the stories of like, well, like I'm trying to earn the success to honor my parents and grandparents and like people that, and so one of the reasons I will tell you why I chose it.
Okay.
It's because first and foremost, I knew that come heck or high water, I would have a technical skill that is always going to be in demand and that's going
Yes.
to have a high ability to earn income, a relatively high income. So there was this safety. If I could get into dental school, I knew I could easily make $250,000 a year on my technical skill. But
Yeah.
here's the other thing that I knew. What I really knew going in was that I was going to run a dental business, and that I knew that if I was going to be a businessman going the MBA route, I was going to spend almost as much time in school, but start from zero and have to work my way up through companies.
Yeah.
But as a dentist, I graduated with the ability to start $1 million business right then and there. That was a clear pathway. And so what I felt like was technical skill was my backstop, my safety net.
Okay.
And I can still, I mean, even though you don't want me to touch you after 8 years of not doing dentistry, I could still go
Yeah.
do it.
Sure.
But
Or at least advise at parties on what people ought to do with their teeth.
I mean, it's priceless, right? Like, and but what I actually had an accelerated pathway to was an entrepreneur's position, a role, an executive role, in a fast track, right, to a business that had multiplicative growth. And so that was why I went to dental school.
I love that. Without going too deep into the story, I think the business that you sold was called Carolina Dental. Was that right?
Carolina's Dentist was the second dental group that I built. It was the one that I had my first intentionally positive exit from. I had a duress exit from the first group that I built.
Okay.
I did. You asked the question of did I work for the man ever? Kind of.
Yes.
Kind of I did. So I graduated at a really horrible time.
Which was
Good
when?
from an interest rate perspective, but 07, 08. And so we know we had a financial crisis. And I went out to do a startup and the bank approved me. And then the financial crisis hit and they called me and said, we actually can't give you that money. And it was like, what do you mean you can't give me the money that you said? Was it, well, we can give you money, but not really enough for you to actually start a practice, much less the commitment.
So when you talk about getting a loan for the startup and that loan was reneged, you're talking about starting a dental practice from scratch from the ground up.
We had a loan. Yeah, I was starting from the ground up. I had a loan for $700,000 to go and do it. They called back and they said, we were just kidding. We can give you 150. And I was
Wow.
like, this is awkward.
It's not
I
going to do a
don't
whole
know.
lot.
I had a business model already because of what I had done. I knew what I was doing. I had my location picked. I had everything planned out. And I was like, man, I don't know that that's going to cut it. And at the same time, I got a phone call from a large, it was at the time, one of the 10 largest dental groups in America.
Okay.
And they reached out and they said, "Hey, we heard you had talked to us a while back, and we heard you're doing a startup in a town that we've been dying to get into for a really long time. Just meet with our CEO and talk."
Cool.
And what he didn't know is that I just lost
The funding.
75% of my loan.
Yeah.
But I went in and I said, "Listen, I know this is going to be successful. I know what I'm doing. I know the demographics. Like, you'd have to make me an offer I can't refuse for me to want to do this with you guys versus doing it otherwise." And he said, "Listen, I'll make you a part owner from day zero, and we'll give you carte blanche. Like, we'll give you our buying power, our support. We'll even get you a better location. We've already got 3 better locations than what you were after." And so I was like, without having to show my cards, I was like, okay, fine. But at the end of the day, honestly, it was definitely my best offer. And so then I had a relationship. And then
That's
I was
really
a
cool.
part of a bigger company, but it didn't turn out the way I wanted because I was still working for someone that had their own problems and their own stuff. Lesson number 2.
Yeah. So it sounds like you kicked off that relationship and opened up a new office through this dental group in 2008. How long were you with
I
them?
opened 3 in 3 years. They were the number 1, number 2, and number 3 fastest growing practices they'd ever seen. And that was great. Sounded great. It was exciting.
What do you attribute that to? I mean, obviously...
Well, I want to believe it was me.
Oh, putting that aside just for a moment, when we think about growing businesses, right? Sometimes the timing is right. Sometimes you have an amazing product or an amazing price, or the marketing has been great, or the sales is great. Like, if you're doing comparative analysis across all these other practices they had in their portfolio, what was unique about what you were doing with these 3 that they were the fastest growing?
It was a confluence of things. Did we have a good market? Yeah. But what we did right was how I approached the market. How we approached the market, the way that we behaved. A lot of it was just the intention that we put into it. Like, we did things nobody else did. And a lot of people told us we wouldn't even have success in the market, and we had resounding success.
When you say you did things nobody else did, what do you mean?
We operated extended hours.
I see.
We put ourselves in locations that other dentists, we did retail locations. Like, you can't do that. You got to go into medical office parks. That's where everybody else goes. And you'll never get your money back on that location. We had people walk in every day that paid for it, and so we took a patient-centric approach.
Yeah. Okay, you beat me, because I was going to say I had a hypothesis of probably what led you to do some of those things of extended hours or the location placements.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what was the North Star in your decision-making that was guiding those changes to what was the norm in your industry?
I guess one thing that you could say is that I just didn't want to be like everybody else. And I was so committed to my own success, to the success of what we were doing, that I recognized that I had to listen to what, not just what people said, what patients say, but also what they respond to. And I broke the mold and I said, "Listen, like, I've spent my life saying, I want to be different than everybody else is for you as a customer and give you what you really want." And that's what we did. We figured our whole commitment was, what do we have to do to make it easy for you to say yes to something that you honestly aren't excited to do? I was selling dentistry. Who's sitting there right now saying, "I'm so excited to go to my dentist"? I appreciated that. Nobody wants to be with me, but they do want their experience with us to be as good as possible. And so, like, how do you balance that?
Yeah. I love the focus that you're bringing up of doing things that were outside of the norm, not just to be different, although I know you've cited that a little bit, but really because you want to stand out in the sea of options that your customer has available. And I would assume the whole reason why you did extended hours was because people were saying, "Hey, it's difficult for me to make it into the office during the workday," right?
You got it. And you know what else I knew? I knew that nobody else in my area did it.
Yeah.
And so when you sit there and you say, "Hey, everybody's already full on patients. You ain't going to get no patients." I said, "Well, actually what I did is I took their patients." And you know what? I had patients tell me that all the time. I'm like, "Hey, Mrs. Smith, it's great to meet you. Tell me a little bit why you picked our practice." And they're like, "Listen, I saw Dr. Jones for 61 years, but he's only open during the day when I'm working, and you guys made it easy for
Yes.
me to get in here. I'm like, well,
Yeah. Well,
61 years, 2 generations, and you came to us.
you've keyed in on something, or you shared something rather, that I think it doesn't matter who you are listening to this conversation that we're having, whether you're coming from dentistry, from medical profession, or whether you're in a totally different sort of industry. And that is, you garnered fast growth because you were a student of what customers wanted, and you were a student of delighting customers. And I think so frequently in business, we see businesses fail because we don't listen to customers, or we build something that we think customers want, but we haven't actually gone and talked to those customers. So I love that insight. I think that's something that's really applicable for anybody, regardless
Yeah.
of whatever industry they're in. We won't go too deep into it right now because we're going to dive into it a little bit later in the conversation. But give us, so you were there for 3 years. So that took you what, '08 to 11, and then
Yep.
you started Carolina's Dentist. So apparently that was about an 8-year run because you mentioned you had sold that in 2019.
Yep.
Give us just the highlight of that. Who did you sell to? What did the deal look like? Were you selling to a third party? Was it a strategic acquirer or a financial acquirer? What's just sort of the high level overview of that exit that you had in 2019?
Well, first, we'll get to it, I guess, probably like, why was I exiting? What was my commitment inside of
Yeah.
that? And I knew that I was not, I knew that what I needed was geographic flexibility, and
Okay.
I didn't want to be related to that business anymore. That was just like the decision that I had made. Now, in hindsight, maybe I would do things different. But that was my decision. So we were open to a strategic buyer
Okay.
or a PE exit in that. We also took some interest from family offices, but in truth, most of the family offices, because of what they're looking for, wanted me to stick around, and that wasn't an option for me. So if you think about what we needed, I had some business partners in the business, but I had been the CEO
Yeah.
of the business up until that point. And so what we really needed is we needed someone that had the resources to be able to, everybody else was sticking around but me. And so
Cool.
we needed someone that had the resources to provide for the future of the business, to go in the correct
Yes.
direction. We wanted a good future partner. This wasn't about like drop the mic and whatever else.
Sure.
And so that's why and honestly, like, there weren't a lot of strategics that we could find that were similar,
Yeah.
that made also a lot of the investments we had made didn't have value to some of the strategics. So like, no, we don't care about
Yeah.
these things. We don't care about team. Well, you don't care about this other stuff, you
Yeah.
know? And so what ended up happening, believe it or not, was that it was sort of a combined situation. It was a PE firm that had an existing dental company in their portfolio that had a very different strategy than ours. They were 100% acquisition based, where we had been 100% new location based. And so what it looked more like in some senses were some mergers of operational skills and capacities. They're like, they valued what we had built and
I
what we
see.
had because they didn't have it in the existing side of their portfolio, but the two companies blended together really nicely. So that's where we ended up.
Nice. Two things as a quick follow-up. Give us a sense of size and scale. How many locations were you at that point when you were acquired? How many employees in the operation?
We were just short of about 300 employees.
Wonderful.
We had large multi-doctor, like typically 3 to 4 doctors per location was the way that we operated. So it was a unique model. We had a bunch under development. I don't remember whether we were 7,
Yeah,
8
totally
or
okay.
9 locations at the time. But they were large locations, and and
Cool.
that's what I recall. 3.5 to 4 million, I think, in EBIT at the time, something like that.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to just go back and break down a couple of terms that you talked about because I think they are really important for some folks who might be earlier on their journey thinking about how they're going to build towards an exit. You talked about strategics. You talked about private equity. You talked about family offices.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about third-party acquisitions, I always say to people, there's only 8 ways to sell a company: 4 internal and 4 external. So obviously, when we begin to think about external sales to third parties, they tend to break down into financial acquirers and strategic acquirers. Obviously, strategic acquirers are valuing the company for more than just a multiple of their annual cash flow. So when you were talking about strategic acquirers, just to help maybe some of the listeners understand that a little bit, who would those strategic acquirers have been, and why would they have potentially wanted to buy you for more than your cash flows in your particular industry?
Yeah, so strategic acquirers were existing dental groups. They
Okay,
have,
great.
and what made them strategic is they already have a go-to-market approach. They already have an infrastructure, systems, HR, all the things in place doing this exact business model.
Yep.
And what they're doing is, that, I mean, they are still doing a financial aggregation. So they're going to buy us
Yep.
at a multiple, but the aggregate multiple that they
Yeah.
now have by having us in their portfolio, say they're buying us at a 8.5 multiple on EBITDA, but by acquiring us into their portfolio, they're probably valuing it at 12. So
Which is what we call EBITDA arbitrage. in
EBITDA
technical M&A
arbitrage. So they
world.
bought us at 8.5, and we're automatically worth 12 because we're a part of their bigger company now. So
Yeah.
so there's no reason for them not to do it. And you know, this is their job. They should be really good at it. It should be really
Yes.
straightforward and simple. But in comparison, like sometimes when we're looking at financial, a financially backed, so just a private equity group, this might be their first step into the dental industry. They want to be
Yes.
in dental. They're super excited. And right now, like there's hundreds of these PE groups that are sitting there saying that. They're like, I'd love to be in dental healthcare. It's great. Let's go. But they have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience in, oh, we did dermatology, we did orthopedic, we did this, we did that. This is our first step into dental. So they don't have a specific dental architecture or anything like that. We would then be the baseline that they would build around as they build a broader, theoretically, as they then become the backers of a strategic inside the dental industry.
Wonderful. I love it. I love it. So we talked a little bit about strategic. Private equity is its own animal. Family offices tend to be, for those unfamiliar with that term, those would tend to be offices of affluent or high net worth families. Sometimes they may have their own manager that they hire. There's certainly a growing trend in fractional family offices where wealth advisors or financial advisors have built out entire teams now, and they're taking that capital and deploying it in places other than traditional stocks and bonds, right? But there tends to be a strong focus on preservation of capital.
And where strategics and PE groups are usually on a 3 to 5 year timetable, family offices are typically, not always, but they're typically or often on very long-term timetables. They're looking for just solid, stable dividends. And sometimes they don't even have a plan to exit. They'll be content to retain for 20 some years.
And Eric, since you sold to private equity, that was your exit out, because you talked about some things that made this group a little bit unique in the private equity space. Just from a deal structure point of view, you know, one of the things that we see future sellers commonly misunderstand is how they get paid, right? There's a taxation issue, there's earnouts, there's rollovers. Again, just at a super high level, did you have deferred payments in your deal structure, whether those were performance-based payments like earnouts, or whether that was the private equity group asking you to roll money over into their fund?
So their preference would have been that I had an earnout in there. They offered, I did not want an earnout because I was trying to sever my relationship emotionally with the business. That was a choice. I think I walked away from money inside of that, but in light of what I know afterwards, I'm really glad that I did. Just because I know my personality and I would have been very vested in what was going on, and I wouldn't have been able to separate. I did have, there were some escrowed funds. So as a portion of, you know, I mean, with anything, it's really, when a private equity buyers are not dumb, and they're going to make sure that there's no surprises that come up or no surprise debts or something like that they didn't account for. And so roughly $1 million of my proceeds were held in escrow after everything was complete.
For how long?
I believe that it was a half was distributed at a year, and then the remainder at 2 years. So for 2 years there was, or maybe I don't know, something like that. Up to 2 years post, there was some money that was retained. Yeah.
So it may not have been an earnout but you did have a deferred payment where they were setting money aside in escrow for
That's
reps
right.
and warranties, or to make sure the business was going to
Reps
perform,
and
or
rep
something
was
like
all
that.
reps and warranties
Yeah.
type stuff.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. No, that's really great. Really helpful. And we'll dive into that a little bit more in a moment. Hey, let's transition from just your background and oriented folks, knowing that, hey, it's been what, 24,
Been
6
5
years
years.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, since you've exited. Let's talk about, let's talk a little bit of, and let's pivot just for a moment. One of the things that we believe at our firm, Legendary Exits, is that exiting isn't just about the money. And that, I think, is supported by the stat that 70% of owners deeply regret selling their company within a year of selling it, which is really shocking when I read that about a year ago.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of curious, as we move to just a little segment here, we're talking about more than the money. What was your experience with either satisfaction or regret after you exited? What was that like within the first year after you exited the company?
Well, I guess the easy way to say it is that if it had been about the money, I probably would have been the statistic.
Yeah.
Money comes and goes. And I was very intentional. I was very intentional from the get-go. Money made the exit possible, but it wasn't the reason I was exiting.
Okay.
The money was sufficient for me to move on with my life. The key was moving on with my life. The key was what I wanted. I was very intentional. I knew why I was exiting, and it wasn't money. It was about relationships. It was about living in a different place. It was about having a different experience. It was about not being tied to that business anymore and freeing myself to what I felt was my unique ability. It was about changing my life. I was like, I was bound, geographically, relationally, and a lot of what was there. And I've come to learn that some things weren't as bad as I thought they were, as I look back, as time has healed some wounds. But at the end of the day, like I was very intentional that my exit wasn't about money. And that's why I feel so great about how it turned out.
I love it. Let's follow up on that. You mentioned something about relationships.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have shared, just because we've got a personal relationship ourselves going on almost 5 years now, that I think that might have been even family directed, a desire to invest more deeply into family relationships. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that what you're speaking about?
Totally. My family paid a price when I built that business. My wife and my children paid a heavy price for the commitment that I made to the business. And I became someone that I didn't want to become. I never would have said that my business was more important than my kids. But if you looked at my allocation of time and energy, my business was more important to me than my wife and my kids. And I allowed it to be a wedge between us. I allowed it to be prioritized over the people I said that mattered most. And this could just be a personal weakness, but I didn't know how to break that cycle and still be related to the business, Micah.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the honesty on it. How do you, I'm sure there's a lot of folks listening and say, well, you talked about the investment of where your time and your energy was going. I think energy is a really great one to focus on. But for most of us who are working any kind of a job, whether it's working for the man or whether it's working, like most of these listeners to this podcast, whether it's working for ourselves, that is an amazing place where, just percentage-wise of our time where it goes. I mean, are you saying that the vast majority of our time shouldn't go towards our businesses, or are you saying that it's more about the quality or the focus of where our energy is directed?
No, I'm not saying that. I mean, I certainly believe that the majority of our time should go somewhere. It's about the level of control that we have over where that best energy and time goes, though. It's about the business isn't worth it if we're not showing up as the parents and friends and partners that we intend to be. And I didn't have a pathway. I didn't have a clear pathway for me to show up as the father and the husband that I wanted to be while I was still in a relationship with that business. And there's a lot of reasons for that, a whole lot of reasons. Again, I now know, I've now worked for 5 years to build ways to be able to apply the level of intention in my home and my business at the same time. But that wasn't a skill that anybody gave to me. It's not a pathway that was ever shown to me. It's not something where somebody said, Eric, all you need to do is this. I didn't have any answers, and I had tried for years. And what it looked like was me just continuing to say to my wife and to my kids, no, 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 wait, it'll be better next year. And next year always came around and it looked the exact freaking same. And I had to change something.
Yeah. I love you're talking about living. This decision was motivated by more than money, by living a life of intention and of purpose and wanting to invest into relationships. I'm curious to just zoom up for a second, at least where Eric Roman sits at today.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talk a lot with our community and our clients about is living a life of significance. So whether you call it living a life of significance or you're living a life of purpose or a life of intention, like what is that? Because how do you define that? Because what I'm hearing from you is that while you were building this company, you had a vision of what that was, but you didn't feel like you were fully able to live into that vision. Yeah. So I guess the first question would just be, what are you living life by? You know, what is purpose or living a life of significance or living a life of intention look like to you today?
Yeah, well, it looks like today. That's actually what it looks like when you think about it, Micah. Like the fact that my number one, that I know who I am outside of the business. Because when I was inside the business, success was financial movement of the business. That was success, Micah. It was a dollar bill. It was like financial growth. And when that was success, I became that. That's what I woke up every day and I looked at. And what I didn't look at was who Eric actually was and is called to be, how I serve a purpose greater than me. And then how I'm actually like, do my children really know who I am? Do we actually have relationships together? Am I pouring into them in the way that I want to be pouring into them? Am I enjoying my days? Like, do I get to take joy in the experiences that matter to me? Like, do I get to have fun? And those things weren't present when I was serving the dollar, right? And so I had to shift. I just had to shift into discovery mode though, Micah, because outside of the business, I really didn't know who I was. All I knew is that I wasn't showing up for the people that I wanted to in the manner that I wanted to, right? I wasn't living a life of purpose outside of the financial growth of the business. That was my purpose.
Yeah, I hear you almost comparing and contrasting the traditional definition of success, which I oftentimes see. We're indoctrinated with it. When you open the newspaper or your local business journal, we hired more people, we moved into a bigger building, we have more revenue, right? That's like the business definition of success. Or the personal definition of success is like, hey, I went snowmobiling in Montana, I went skiing in Aspen, here, look at this view off the back of my house. But you're really pointing us to something, not that some of those things are not wrong in and of themselves, but you're pointing us to something different than those traditional success metrics. So how did you go, like, it's clear that you've got this life of intention now, but how did you bridge the gap from where you were then to where you are now? Well, I'm sure there are a lot of folks that would be very interested to hear that.
A lot of personal work, Micah. It wasn't easy. Those were some hard years. Micah, when I intentionally stepped away from the business, I let go of everything that had defined me. I was now like a has-been. I let go of the team that had supported me. I let go of the things that had validated my energy and my time every single day. And I went and I stepped into a new place with a bunch of new problems that I didn't know how to solve. A place with problems that I knew of, that even though I didn't like the problems in the business, I at least had a sense of what to do to get through them. Now I stepped into a world of new problems that I'd never encountered before, new challenges and new issues. And I had to be, Micah, I thought that in walking away from the business that all my problems would be clear. And what I discovered was that I actually now had more problems than I'd had before. And they were problems that were new to me. I solved nothing leaving the business. I solved nothing, despite the fact that I had a full bank account. I hadn't solved anything at all. I had created a bunch of new problems that now needed my work and my attention. The one thing that I had that was my new gift was I now had the time capacity to apply my internal energy towards solving these new problems. And I had the freedom of mind to be able to step into it. And that was my new commitment and my new journey. It was the second mountain for me.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for joining us on Legendary Exits. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to subscribe to the show to stay connected with more stories of purpose-driven exits. You can find more information at legendaryexits.com. Until next time.